Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to use geometry nodes in Blender 3.0 to make some procedural Christmas gifts. Let's get started. All right, so let's start off by getting set up for geometry nodes. I'm just going to go over here to the geometry nodes tab and click that to set up my geometry nodes workflow. Now, we don't need the camera or the light, and we're just going to work with the cube. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click new to create a new geometry node system. Now again, if you don't have this layout set up, you can just find the geometry nodes section in the little drop down in the corner of every window. And we're going to call this gift. First thing we're going to do is we're going to actually just get rid of the group input because we don't even need this cube. We're going to go Shift A, mesh primitives, and we're going to grab a cube. I'm going to drag this mesh output into the geometry output. Now, the thing to remember with geometry nodes is this group output is always the thing that is going to sort of render the final geometry or bring the final geometry into your scene. So whatever we plug into this is always the last node everything goes into. Now this cube node generates a cube using these parameters right here. And what we're going to do is create some random sizes in the size section for the X, Y, and Z. So we get these different shaped GIFs kind of randomly as we roll a seed. So we're going to go to Shift A and type random and get a random value node. And we're going to switch this to vector because we need a vector. Now you can see the purple color that delineates that this input takes a vector and this outputs a vector. So the colors correspond to what kind of information they take. If you're not familiar with what a vector is in math, vector is a set of numbers. In Blender, it tends to be a set of 3 numbers if we're describing the position of an object in 3D space. So when we say a vector, we mean it's a combination of a set of numbers. So when we plug this in, we get this red angry line here and our cube disappears. You can see that things aren't working. So what's going on? The reason why this isn't working is actually leads to a fundamental idea that you have to understand in doing geometry nodes in Blender 3.0 and forward. So that's the idea of this ID. So what is an ID? So to understand an ID, we need to look at what the spreadsheet is showing us. If I go into edit mode, you can see the vertexes here for my cube. And I've got 8 of them, right? Now, each of these points, each of these vertexes have a location in 3D space. And they're listed here in this spreadsheet under vertex. So you can see I have 8 indexes here, 0 to 7, and each one has a corresponding position, which is 3 numbers, which represents the X, Y, and Z position in 3D space. So that describes where each of these vertexes exists in our world space. Now, each of these indexes is considered an ID. This is the ID for each index. So if I was to say the ID of 7, I would be talking about this final index right here with this position and any other information that might pertain to that vertex. So the reason why Blender wants an ID here is because usually what happens, if you look at this, if I plug this back in, right, see how it's a dotted line? Whenever you see a dotted line in geometry nodes in Blender 3.0, you need to think about things in terms of running in a loop. So what it wants to do is when it shows that dotted line, it's going to say, look, this node is expecting to loop through a set of ID numbers. So whether it's all of them or just a few of them, it's going to go through a set of these IDs. And for each one, it's going to do something relating to whatever values are inside that ID, right? And it will output a value for each one of those. So it kind of iterates through all of them. So it's not just grabbing one value and plugging it into this other thing. It's going to do that over and over again for each of those different points. Now, this is a bit confusing starting off with this and using this. We need to use this here at the start, right, to help us get this random value working. But we actually don't need it to run through a loop. We don't need it to go through each of these points and generate a different random value because we actually just want to generate one set of random numbers and input those into the X, Y, and Z position for our cube when we generate it. So we just need to do this once. So this might seem a little intuitive, but it'll make more sense as we go forward because we will be using this whole loop mechanism more as we progress. So I'm just going to go search and type in value. I'll get a value node and I'm just going to plug this directly into the ID. You can see this color conversion thing that's happening. It's basically saying this value node is a floating point number. And the gray dots represent floating point numbers. If you're not familiar with a floating point number, it's a number with a decimal. So it's a single number with a decimal and some trailing zeros or trailing numbers. It's showing this gradient because it's converting this value, this floating point value into an ID. These are IDs, right? So IDs aren't floating point. IDs are integers, right? So they're just a single value with no trailing numbers after a decimal point. So it's converting that, so it's going to be rounding it up. So if this is 0 point whatever, it's still going to be reading this as 0. As soon as we get to 1, it's going to start reading the ID as 1. Now, this doesn't really matter. What we're basically saying is look at the ID of 0. It's going to find 0. It's going to look at this ID. But we're not telling it to do anything with the position or any of that. So it's just kind of going to disregard it. It's sort of just a requirement. It just needs to have the ID, because now if you see, if we plug this in, it's going to work. It's also not dotted. It's not a dotted line. Did you notice that? And that's because we're telling it just one single ID. So it's not looping anything. If this was a couple of different numbers, then this would become a dotted line because it was going to be looping through all those. I hope that makes some sense. It'll make more sense as we progress. But all right, I'm going to switch back to shaded mode. And we need to set these numbers to be a little bit higher because we never want the package to disappear because of the scale being 0. So I might bring each of these up. If you just click and drag down a vector like that, you can actually select all of them and change them at once. So I might try something like 0.6 to begin with. And what we can do is roll this seed value, and this will generate different sizes. So yeah, I can bring this down a little bit more. I might go 0.3. What does that give me? Yeah, that gives me a good variation of sizes. Looks great. All right, cool. Now, one problem we've got is every time we generate a new package size, you can see that the origin is always right in the middle. And naturally, you want your GIFs to sit on the floor. You don't want your GIFs to, be sunken into your floor, because that just defies physics and it's creepy. So what we're going to do is we're going to shift the present up based on the height. Okay, so what we need to do next is move it. So we are going to go here and we're going to type in set position, and we'll drop this here. And the geometry feeds into the geometry output input, and geometry output goes to that one here. So it just fits right into our flow. We're not doing anything to it just yet, but we're going to be using this offset here, and we are going to offset it up based on the height. Now we've generated this height over here in this random value vector, but we need to split it up because we just want the Z value. We just want how tall this thing is on the Z, right? So I'm going to grab a separate XYZ node, and I can bring this value out and plug it in right there. And then what I can do is I can take the Z and I could plug this in over here to my offset, but I also need X and Y. I can't just plug this single value into this. Otherwise it'll put this value into all of those, and so it will move off into a direction. So we need to actually create a new vector. So I'm going to go here and go combine XYZ. You can see how these work together. And all I need is the Z. So I'll plug the Z in like this. And now I can plug this in, and now it's going to move it up on the Z value the same amount that it is high. But of course, now you can see it's not working. It's floating above everything. That's because we actually don't need to move it all the way that high, because the origin is always in the middle of the object. So we need to move it up half the height, if that makes sense. So let's do some simple math and divide the Z by 2. So I'm going to go up here, type in math, not vector math, just normal math, because we're just dealing with a floating point number, the gray to gray. I'll drop this here. I'm going to switch this to divide, and I'll just divide by 2. Now you can see that it's sitting on the ground, and whenever I roll my seed, the present will always be appropriately placed. Ta-da! It's very exciting. Okay, now next thing we're going to do is let's make this present look a little bit better in terms of the geometry. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to grab a subdivide mesh. I'll drop this here. We'll just subdivide it. If you switch to wireframe mode, you can see what's happening. Just subdividing the mesh a little bit. And then I'm going to come here and I'm going to grab a subdivision surface, and I'll drop this here, and that will round things off nicely. And now what I can do is I can increase the crease, and that will dampen things off a little bit towards the edge. And that makes a pretty nice looking gift. You can decide how hard edged you want your gifts to be. I don't like hard edged gifts. It's too unfriendly for Christmas. I like soft edged gifts. I increase that up a little bit more. Now we need to shade smooth, because see, we've got that faceted look. If I right click and shade smooth, it's not going to do anything, because we actually have to do it within geometry nodes. So I'm going to come here, I'll type in shade smooth, and set shade smooth is the correct node. Drop that there, and as long as this is ticked on, it's going to work. So there we go. I got this nice little gift. Now we need to do some ribbons. So how are we going to pull that off? Well, let's start with this mesh, because we know that whenever this thing changes size, right, we want the ribbon to be the same size as the package. Basically, we just need it to be smaller. So to create this, what we're going to do is we're going to use a special node called the delete geometry node. Okay. Delete geometry node will do what it says, deletes geometry. And we can set it to all. We don't want to just do edges and faces. We can do all of it. And I can bring this in right here. And now what I need to do is create a selection. I'll go ahead and set this out right. I'll go ahead and actually just plug this in. So we'll join everything up later once we get the ribbon figured out, okay? Now we need to make a selection because we don't delete everything, we just delete some of it. And what I'm going to do is, this ribbon is going to, let's just bring it back so we can talk about, we want this ribbon to kind of just be right through the middle, right, of the X and on the Y. So let's think about the Y direction first. I basically want to delete everything right up until close to the origin, and then I want to delete everything this way on the Y close to the origin as well. So we can do that by creating a selection. So remember, we're thinking about everything in terms of the vertexes that live on this cube. You can see we have an absolute ton of these, probably way too many for this. That's a bit nuts. But anyways, each of these points where these lines intersect is a new vertex. It's been created by geometry nodes. And each of these has a position and each of these has an ID. And so we can basically identify which ones we want based on these values. So we can say that everything that lives, that has a value on the Y, so this is the X and this is the Y, so this center column, everything right here that is greater than, let's say 0.1 on the Y, we should delete, but everything less than that we should keep. And that should delete everything here right up until like this point along the package. So let's try that. First, we need to grab the position of all these things. Now, this is we're going to do some looping that I was talking about. So what's the position? Let's go here, position is a node that we can grab. You can see it's got a purple output, so it's going to give us a vector. And if you pull it out, you see it's dashed, which means this is going to loop through the position of all the different IDs, which again, these are all the IDs. So it's going to loop through everything. So let's take this and let's do a math on all of those. Let's create a loop where we're going to run through everyone and check whether or not the Y position is greater than a number. So first we need to get a hold of just the Y position. So let's separate X, Y, Z. You can plug the position vector in. You can see it stays dotted, so we know that we're doing this to everything. We just want to look at the Y position right now. So I'm going to grab the Y position, and I'm going to pop this into a math node. And I will take the Y, I'll stick it in here, and let's go for the greater than, because we want to delete stuff. So greater than, and we'll just leave it at 0.5 for now. And now I want to take this value, and I'm going to plug this into the selection. You can see it's converting it. It's taking this value and it's turning it into an ID. So what this means is that everything that is greater than 0.5, it's going to pass through the ID to the selection of that particular entry in our spreadsheet. Okay, so let's plug this in and see what it looks like. Right, so we've lost everything, so 0.5 is probably too much. So let's bring this down. There it is. You see it starts to work. All right, so we're looking at this the wrong way. We should be looking at it like this, but that's all right. So you can see here we've been able to delete things. So we decide how big we want this ribbon to be. I'm just going to hold down Shift so I can make smaller incremental drags there. And now we need to do the other side. We need to cut this side and go in. So we can do the same thing, but instead of greater than, we need to do a less than. So we can take the Y and do the same thing, plug it into here. And then we can create another delete geometry node, pull this here, and we take this value and plug it into the selection this way, and then drag it out a little bit. And we want it to sit kind of right in the middle, so we should probably use the same value on both, but just have one be negative and one positive. So in this case, we go 0.110. So that's the positive version of this. We could simplify this by taking a value node, right? And typing the 0.110 into it, and then having a math node like this set to multiply. And we could take the value, plug it into the top one, make this -1. And then we can plug this one into here and this one into here. And that will do the same thing. But now we can just affect one number to change the overall size of the ribbon. Let's make the other ribbon, right? So we need to take this whole thing and just flip it around. So instead of looking at the Y this time, what we're going to do is grab the X, because we're going to do the same process along the X. So let's just organize this a little bit. And we're just going to take this whole system here. We can leave this up. We'll grab all this and Shift D and drag it up. And now what we can do is we can grab the X and plug it into the threshold. Now, last thing we do is we need to plug in the geometry pipe up to here. So we're bringing the original present up here, creating the ribbon that goes like this, and then we're bringing the same geometry up here, doing the same process, but in the other direction with the X. And now, if you look at this geometry, if I plug this one in, you can see we're getting something similar. We want to join these two together. So let's go ahead and create a join geometry node. And we'll drop this here, and we'll take this one and plug this one in here. And there we go. Now we've joined our ribbons. Now, of course, we can do the same thing again by joining in. Let's drag this here, dragging in our present. So now we've got the box and the ribbons. Of course, they're all the same size, so they overlap and we can't actually see them. So we need to expand the ribbons out a little bit, all right? So in order to do that, what we're going to do is move all the points along the surface of the ribbon out a little bit. We want to move them out from the origin point, right? So all of them kind of go out based on the direction that they face. So in order to do that, we need to use something called the normal. So I will show you how to do that next. Let's actually unplug this bottom one so we can see the ribbons. That's the negative. So we'll go ahead and plug these in just like the other ones so that now this one value changes the ribbon size for the whole lot. That looks pretty cool. And let's actually start off by separating these guys. So let's take this ribbon and we're going to move it up. So I'm going to go set position, drop it here. And I want to offset all the different vertex points out just a little bit, right? So how do we do that? Well, we don't want to just move them all up, right? I could just take this and offset them up or down, you know. But what I want to do is actually take it and expand it out from the surface of the package. It's kind of a complex question because how do we do that? It's going to be different for each of these different points along the surface of this ribbon, right? This top part of the ribbon needs to go up. This side needs to go out this way into the negative x. This side needs to go out this way on the positive x. This one needs to go negative y. This needs to go positive y. But you can see that each point actually has slightly different direction that it needs to go. So the easiest way to get that into a number that we can work with is to use the normal. Now, what's a normal? Let me show you real quick. If you're not familiar with normals, go back into edit mode. You can see our original cube here. And I'm going to open up my drop down here and I'm going to turn on normals. And this is just going to visualize the normals. I'll just drag this out so they're a bit bigger. See those blue lines that are pointing out from each of the faces. These blue lines are representing the direction that these faces are pointing in, okay? Now we can look at those actually. If we come over here to face, this is going to give us all the faces, not in this cube, but in the new piece of geometry that we generated. That's where there's so many entries. But look at the normal here is listed under the face. We get a lot more options when you look at like from the vertex to the edge, the face. The face has got a ton more information here. And right here we have the normal for each of these. And you can see it's 0, 0, negative 1. Well, negative 1, if you think of this as x, y, and z, negative 1 would be going down on the z, whereas positive 1 would be pointing up. So these are the directions that the different vertexes or different faces are pointing. And you see this one's actually a little bit different. It's got two values, and this one's got a bit of an angle to it, is what that means. So we can use that because we want to move the points in these directions, right? So if this thing is pointing negative 1 on the z, we want to move it negative on the z as well. So we need to figure out a way to create a calculation that helps us get that. Now think of this as like a recipe. Once you learn this recipe, you're good. You can always use this recipe to do this effect. You don't have to fully comprehend the math if you're finding it a little slippery to grab a hold of. It will make sense to you over time, but don't expect yourself to understand all this in one go if this is new for you. Think of this more as, hey, learn this node recipe and you can use this to do this effect, okay? So let's go ahead and set up that recipe. I'm gonna go Shift A and I'm gonna grab the normal. Now you can see it's just like the position node, the normal node will basically give me the normal for every single bit on my object. Let's just take the normal and plug it directly into the offset. So it's gonna take, whatever the values are here and it will apply it here. So it'll offset in the direction it's facing. So if I plug this in, see what happens is it expands. It grows right out, but it expands importantly away from the origin and it expands in the direction that each face is facing. So it's pretty simple when you see it here in its node form. All you need is the normal node plugged into an offset. It's going to move it along the normal. Like that's pretty easy to get your hold of instead of trying to understand all the math. But if you can understand the math, you can actually use it even more powerfully and figure out how to manipulate this to your advantage. But this is moving it a bit too much, right? We don't need it to go this far. We need to just go a little bit. So let's use some math to make this number smaller. So I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to grab a vector math node. Now, the reason I'm grabbing a vector math and not just a normal math is because this purple output tells me this is a vector. And I need to keep it within that space for this to work. I can take the normal, plug it in here. I could set this to something like multiply. And then I could change all these guys to some small number like 0.01. And now I can plug this in to the vector. And now you can see, or into the offset. Now you can see it's offset just a tiny bit. Now, to make this easier to input, you can actually grab a value node and plug this in and then set this to something like 0.01. And what that'll do is it'll take this floating point number and it just inserts it into all three of the vector fields so that it works. That way, it's a bit quicker to just kind of enter those values in. Now I can adjust this and make it bigger or smaller, however I want. So I'm going to set this to, 0.02 is probably good. And I need to do the same thing for the other ones. So I can take this set position, normal, and value, all those. I can shift D to duplicate, and I can grab this here. Now this one I might make just a little bit bigger, so maybe 0.03 so that these aren't overlapping. And now you can see when we do join this all up with the original geometry, my ribbons sit above the package. Awesome, making progress. Okay, so to start to visualize this a bit easier and start to see things, I'm going to go ahead and add some lights to my scene and get some materials on this present, and then we can push things forward a little bit more. So I'm going to select my object. I'm going to come over to the material tab, and I've got one material already assigned, and I'll just call this paper, and I'll give this just a Christmassy green color. And then I'll click the plus to create a new material. And I'll click new, and I'll call this one a ribbon, and I'll give this maybe a red. Now, with these two, you'll see they haven't shown up. If I go into render view, they're not actually on the object, even though we have them assigned here. And that's because in geometry nodes, we need to assign them within geometry nodes because we're creating new geometry, basically. So the cube no longer exists. What we can do for that is just come over here to where all these things come into the pipe, and we can grab the material, set material node, and we can drop this one here. And we can select the paper for the package itself. And then we can shift to duplicate this and set these to the ribbon. There we go. So now we can see them. I'll also add a light to my scene. I'll create a sun lamp, rotate it a little bit, and shift to duplicate, rotate it around the other way. Now it looks a little weird with these offsets so far. So we need to correct that. So let's go ahead. We'll come up to where we are generating our ribbons, and we're going to create smaller values for these offsets. Now we can label this stuff if you want to make it a little bit clearer. Like we can come here, select this node right here, and change the label to ribbon offset. And you can see it'll change the name, and that makes it a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to bring that in. I do want it off a little bit, so that's pretty good, I think. All right, now what we need to do is the ribbon. We need to have the little bow at the top. Now that's going to be a little complex, so let's when I'm finding out, whenever I'm approaching a complex new object in geometry nodes, it's kind of best to start fresh. You're just looking at it clean. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'll just unplug everything that we've made so far. And I want to go over here, and we're going to use some of the new curve nodes that we have in geometry nodes. So I'm going to come here and go Shift A, curve primitives, and we're going to create a quadrilateral, and we're going to change it from rectangle to kite. And I'll plug this in so you can see it. Come here, and first we need to change the type. So right now it's a polygon curve. So it's just got these hard edges. So we need to change the curve type. So we're going to curve, set, let's see, set spline type. Drop it here. Poly is what it already is. So we're going to set it to a Bezier. We won't see anything happen yet, but it is a Bezier curve now. And now we go Shift A, curve, set handle type. And we just drop that in. And we can see we've got the auto handles set for just the left, but not the right side. So you get this weird kind of look. So we just need to Shift D, duplicate, and set that to the right as well. So now we've got both. And auto is fine. We can leave it to the auto vector handles. So let's take this now and let's play with these values. You can see as we stretch out the top and the bottom, and then the width, we can start to get this kind of bow-like look, but it's a bit too wide. So that looks a little bit better. So what I might do is just work with 0 on the bottom height and 0 on the width, and then take the top height, and then we can work with it from there. I think that'll be good. Now what we're going to do is we want to take this curve, and we now need to convert it into mesh. And the curve to mesh node actually has a really great feature. I'll show you. So let's go to Shift A, type in curve, and we want to go curve to mesh. There it is. Grab the curve to mesh node and drop that in. Now you can see this profile curve option. Now this is basically meaning, give us a second curve that we can use to loft some geometry. So you can create a circle, for example, and it will loft a circle around this path to create the mesh. Or in our case, we just want to have a flat line because we want this to be a thin ribbon. So I'm going to create another Bezier object. So curve primitive, Bezier, I'll just do a curved line like this. And I will plug this into the profile curve. And there we go, get some very weird results. So this ugly looking thing, not quite what we want. So I'm going to switch this from points to direction. And I'm going to set the direction, I think it's 1 on the Y. Yeah, that looks good. There we go. So you can see it lofts that curve for us in a way that gives us this nice ribbon shape. Now this is actually mesh. So if I switch over to wireframe view, you can see it's a mesh object, which is great because now we can do other things to it. So first thing, let's go ahead and subset the origin so it's right in the middle of the object. That'll make things a little bit easier for us. So let's come here and let's grab a position, set position right here. And we want to offset it by the length. So the length is set to 1 meter. And I'm not sure exactly what the right length is going to be. So I might just create a value node and just plug 0.5 into that value node and stick that into the length. And then I'll use this same number here to drive that. But after we do like we did before, divide it by 2, because we don't want to move it up that whole way. We want the origin to be right in the middle this time of this object. So what we can do is grab a math node. And we can grab this value node, plug it in here, set this to divide or multiply by 0.5. You can divide by 2, multiply by 0.5, up to you, depending on your preference. Everyone's got their preference. And then what we want to do is take this and we're going to stick it into offsetting the Z. So I need to create a combine XYZ node, just like before. And I'll plug that number into the Z. We'll leave X and Y 0, and we'll offset it. Now it's up where we want it there. Now I want to actually transform this a little bit. It doesn't look quite right. So I'm going to grab a transform node, drop it here, and I'm going to scale it on the Y. I'll just bring that in like that. That looks pretty good. So that's nice ribbony kind of bow, I think. Looks lovely. Now I want to rotate it so that it's facing up. So I want to rotate on the Y 90 degrees. I think if we do a second transform now, so these back to 1. And then, yeah, that's a bit more intuitive. That second transform will allow me to rotate it up on the X, so it'll sit kind of flat on the package. Now, of course, we need to duplicate this so we have a bow. So we need to have the same thing twice. So I'll take another transform node. We're going to take all of this, basically, this whole set of things, and we want to join it with another copy of this whole set. So let's grab a join geometry node. Oops, not join strings. Join geo, drop it here. And then we're going to take this output, bring it into here, 0 this out, and I'll plug this into the join. And then I want to rotate this one on the Z. We're going to go 180. Pop it around. So you can see what we've done. We've rotated this whole thing around 180 degrees. So it's taken, it builds this loop, this little ribbon loop, and then it joins it up with another version of this loop that we've piped down here that's been rotated. And that's how we get this continuous piece of geometry that looks like a lovely bow. Now we might want to have, let's have a dual bow. Why not? Let's just do the same thing. Take this, duplicate that. And let's come over here. We want the combined version this time. So I'm going to shift D that join geometry node, drop this here, and 90 degrees. And there we go. We've got this lovely Christmas bow. It's beautiful. So nice. Okay, so we have this Christmas bow object. Now let's combine this thing, right, with all the other stuff that we've got. So come over here. We'll probably get a bit organized now. Let's create a frame node. And I will just make it the same size as all these guys. And then I can come here and hit B to box select all of them, hit G to grab, and then drop them onto that node. Now this frame, whenever I grab it, they're going to stick with it. And I can label this bow. So now I can see nicely, it says bow. Okay. And then we can bring this join into this join. And then we can plug this in there. Great. Now you can see our ribbon is just the perfect size for this Christmas gift. I mean, look at that. We couldn't have nailed that any better, really. Problem, I'll just shift D that transform node, drop this here, zero that out, and I'll grab a value node here, stick that to the scale, and then we can just scale this thing down. Now, we need to position this guy so it's on the top of the present. So we need to go back to the height of our cube And we need to grab that again, and we need to use that to then change the position of this bow. Oh, this is exciting for you guys. Like making this is making me super excited for geometry nodes and all the stuff that's possible. You can see how flexible it becomes once you get in the groove of using it, and you go, oh yeah, I'll just do this, and I'll move this, and I'll use this. So be excited. All right, let's grab the Z position of our random value. Where is it? Here it is, the height. And then what's this again? This is dividing it by 2. Okay, so this is the number we want right here. I might just go here and grab a reroute node, which is a great little tool for just organizing yourself. That way I've got a reroute here, and I can just use it to easily separate that out. So it's clear to me this is what I need. All right. So I could just transform. We just use this. So let's create a combine X, Y, Z. We'll drop this one here, and we'll drop this into the translation of our final transform. And I'll bring this over to the Z. Let's drop it in. There we go. And it sits right on top. This time we don't need to divide by 2. Although we may need to offset it a little bit further because it's right on the package, whereas we want it right on the ribbons. So I might just, we could do some math on that possibly. Yeah, we'll just create a math node, and I'll just drop it here, and I'll just add a value. So I'll just shift and just drag that up a little bit so it sits right on top. Now we also need to get the material right for this bow, so it needs to match. So let's go up here. We can just grab the set material ribbon material and Shift D and drop that here. We can also make sure it lives inside. Perfect. Now I feel like it should be a little bit bigger. So I'll just make that bow size a little bit bigger. This is very cool. Now what's neat about all this is that it's of course procedural. So we can go all the way back to the beginning where we started, to the very first number here, the seed, and we can roll this seed. You can see that this present is going to start changing its size. Now you can use all these numbers to do even more stuff. You can like change the size of your bow. You can cause the ribbons to actually fluctuate in size in a way that's a bit more consistent than what we've got. You see, you just keep piling the math on. Now let's add a little bit of inconsistency to this present so that the wrapping paper and stuff is a little more believable. So I'm going to come over here right to the, we're just do this after we've done everything else. We might need a little more geometry in our bow actually. All right, let's just add a little bit more mesh to this with the subdivision surface. So I'm going to go subdivision surface, drop it in the frame so it's part of the frame, and then bring it up there and maybe pop it to 2. Should be fine. All right, now let's create a bit of noise. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab a noise texture. I'm going to grab just a normal little noise texture. We'll just do this at the end of everything. And what I want to do is the same thing we did before. We want to take the normal, so the direction of every face. We're just going to move all these faces out a little bit based on some noise. Let's come here and go vector math. Drop this here. We're going to multiply the factor by the normal. And then what we can do is you can also take the color. That'll give you a different result. So you just play around with that. Now we want to add this to the position. Now what we could do is we could go, all right, let's grab the position, right? Let's grab the set position, right? Set position. And we could drop this here and we could just drop this in like that, but it's going to be like crazy. Like, look at this. It's disgusting. We can factor this a little bit. Let's go for a math node, and we're going to drop this here, and we can switch this to multiply, and then we can bring this down, so that will offset everything a little bit. Because if we go back to the curved line, the one that we're using to loft the bow shape, we can actually use these inputs here, the start and the direction, to create really interesting bows. So I'd encourage you to play around with these to see what you can come up with. You see, as we move these, it's going to start to open up that geo and just create some very interesting shapes. So I can offset these a little bit so they're not like overlapping as much. And then you can do things like this, like bring these out. Changing the direction is also really nice because it creates just a little bit of curve to those bow objects. There we go. That's a nice look. It's a pretty crazy bow. Yeah, it's looking nice. All right, now let's create some wrapping paper material. So I'm just going to switch over to my material editor and go to my shader editor here. And I've got my paper shader. I'll hit A and hit the full stop key on the number pad just to zoom to my shader. And what we can do is we actually set this up so as we duplicate this object, we can get different types of variations in the color. So I can come over here and I can grab a color ramp and drop this down. I can set it to constant, and then I can just select a bunch of different colors. So I can come over here, go for the Christmas green, maybe a darker version of the Christmas green. Come here, maybe we go for a bit of a red, or even like a purple. Maybe there's a blue present. So you can create a lot of different types of colors. And then what we can do is we can plug it into the base color and come over here and we can set the factor to be, grab the object info node and we can grab this random output and we can drop it in here. Now, if I shift D to duplicate, you see every time I duplicate it, it's going to generate a new random position on this color map to create the base color. So that's a great way to automatically set up a material to generate some cool randomness in the design. Now let's create some interesting wrapping material. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to create a Voronoi texture. And I'm going to grab a color ramp right here. I'll plug the color into the factor, and I will plug this color into let's plug it into the roughness. Now, this will create a nice speckled pattern. If I increase my scale, bring that right down, you can see we're going to get this really nice kind of speckled wrapping paper, which looks really lovely. And then also, I'm going to turn my metallic up, give it like a metallic paper look, and that'll make it very Christmassy indeed. Look at that. Now, I might offset this roughness a little bit so it never goes fully to black. I'll just pull it up a little bit on that color ramp there. And I'll take this one and also pull it down a touch so it's never fully white. Just a little bit like so. It looks pretty good. And bada bing, bada boom, Christmas wrapping paper. Now we can put this same system over into our ribbon. So I'll just copy this. I might copy both of these actually, and just head to the ribbon, paste them in, and I'll change these colors to kind of correspond a bit nicer with these guys. So if one gets matched up with the other, plug that into the base color. And I'll take this and I will plug it into the roughness and I'll turn the metallic up. So I get this nice dual look to it. Maybe the metallic down a little bit. We don't have to go full on with the metallic. Now we duplicate this and see we're getting different ribbon colors and different wrapping papers. Okay, the last thing we want to do is set up a control where we can roll the seed easily on a per package basis. So what we're going to do is come over here to our geometry nodes object. Make sure you've got geometry nodes selected if you've selected something else. We're going to come right back to the beginning where seed is the key number that changes the size of our package. So we want to be able to roll this independently each time we create a new package. So what we're going to do is pull this little output here, and where it says inputs, we're going to add a plus here, and we're going to do a type, the integer type. Actually, let's see, can we do, yeah. So set this to integer, and we could set a minimum of 0 and a maximum of, I don't know, 5,000. That's all we really need. And we can call this our seed. Now you can see it pops up here in the geometry nodes object. We've got this seed object. And now if I come back and add in a group input node, remember we deleted that at the very start. We don't need the geometry input. We're just going to take this seed value and we're going to plug it right in here. And now whenever we roll this number, we can change it directly in here in this window. Plus, if we duplicate and make another one, these seed values are independent of each other. So now I can easily come here and create a bunch of different really cool GIFs of different sizes. And it's nice and easy. There we go. Now, what's cool about this too is that you can really have any input you want for any of these different parameters. So the size of the bow, the thickness of the ribbon strand, all those different things can be inputs that you can create to build a really flexible custom system. One thing that we do have in here that's actually kind of cool is if you take the subdivision mesh of our box down to something that's quite small and then turn up this subdivision surface and decrease the crease, you can see that actually our packages start to go round, which is great. It's so cool. Now it does affect things like we do need to adjust the ribbons a little bit better so that they can actually come out. Now what's really cool is you can actually come over here to the subdivision surface in our box, and if you take the crease down, you actually round out the presence a little bit. So this could be another value that you create. So we could say, all right, let's add another one here. We'll call this roundness. And this one, instead of an integer, I want to have some variation. I want to have a floating point number. So I can just set this to float. And now I can come over here and you can see we've got roundness as another feature. So I could grab my roundness input and I could actually input this into the crease. And now if I change it on a per object basis, you can see we're going to get different types of roundness. And there you have it. We've got our procedural Christmas presents, and they're really fun to lay out and play with those numbers and the color values. That's all I've really done here is just changed around my color values in the material, changed my seed, moved them around, just made a nice little arrangement. It works really well. Now this is an asset that you can actually save to use in your asset library and pull in whenever you want. Just don't forget to take the original one and just right click on it and mark it as an asset. And that will be able to be imported now into any project that you want to use these Christmas presents in. And it's really useful. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to see more, ring the bell. You'll get notifications there. And don't forget to check out the Patreon. We've got a ton of cool stuff over there, including this project file, if you get in during the month that it's been made. So right now it's December 2021. If you get this now, you'll have this for yourself. You can join at the second tier and up. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Have a fantastic holiday, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. See ya.